local church is on a journey in the world. And as it journeys, every church influences its members and its community. At OC Grace, we have a mission from Jesus that defines the influence we aspire to have. Jesus is gearing us up for more than life as usual. We have a way of seeing the world and our purpose in it. Hold your heart up. We have a compass for the journey. Will remain in the world no longer, but they are still in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me, so that they may be one, as we are one. My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one, as we are one. Words from Jesus. Words from Jesus' final prayer before going to the cross. Today, this week, we are celebrating, if you haven't caught it yet, diversity. Here in our congregation, we have over 30 different ethnic and cultural backgrounds. Really, actually, if you talk cultural backgrounds, we have as many as we have homes. Every home is a culture unto itself. But we celebrate our diversity here, and it is part, in fact, of our mission. We talked last week about how reaching and equipping disciples is our horizon. It's what is way out there that we're seeking after. It's the goal we strive for in our journey. And today we're talking about the next letter in our acrostic, our grace acrostic, the A, and it stands for accepting and embracing diversity. And we do this because discipleship is where discipleship occurs, where diversity is. We could say that diversity is the crucible, even, for discipleship. We go into life with all of our impurities and pollutants, and just as a crucible heats up that metal, purifies that gold, and gets all those impurities to the surface so they can be scraped off and put aside, so diversity grows us. It challenges us. I don't like hymns. But even more than that, I don't like people who are more conservative theologically than I am, or people who are more liberal theologically than I am. That's what I would say. That's what I would say as I got on a plane, and I actually mentioned this last week, as I got on a plane and I flew over to Greece to study Greek with students from all sorts of different Adventist colleges. We had students from Walla Walla, where I attended. We had students from La Sierra, not too far away from here in Riverside. We had students from Pacific Union College up north a little ways. We had students from Andrews in Michigan and students from Southern down in Tennessee. We had students from all over the place. Actually, Pastor Nathaniel Sevilla was in that group with me. If you know the Orange Church, just 15 minutes east of us. He's one of the pastors there. And so I go into this group of students, and some of them some of them, they are, believe it or not, more conservative theologically than I am, and others were more liberal theologically than I am, right, as I go into this in 2008. And of course, I'm the one who's got it right? And so we go and we start mixing and interacting and all of these things, and you kind of, I know I'm the only one who does this. You don't do this, but just in case, I'll unpack kind of how it was for me. So, it's like you're there with your friend, right? Your dorm, partner, right? I was there with my roommate, right? We'd been together all the year before, and so we were together. We're dialed in, right? And then you go to your dorm room, and you're like, man, those guys from fill in the blank, right? Those guys. But then one evening, like you do when you're gathered together, one evening we came and we had worship there in the hotel where all of us were staying. The professors who were teaching the different classes, all of us students. There was Greek 1, Greek 2, and Hebrew classes actually going on. So we had a big group. And so we had this worship talk. I forget what it was about, but a little devotional, and then we sang. And being from all these different colleges, some of us knew this song, some of us knew that song, and so we went back. We rolled back to the hymns that all of us knew, right? All of us had grown up on these hymns, and for some reason, they're united around the person of Jesus and worshiping and singing these old songs that I thought I didn't like. We were bound together, and over the course of the next 6 weeks, these people became brothers and sisters. Jesus prays for those who will believe in me to be one. And here this blurry picture is of the feet of those people singing up there in a hotel in Greece. Because it was so moving to me that I actually pulled out a camera and snapped that shot. So we at OC Grace, we accept and embrace diversity. Because in diversity, the crucible for discipleship, Jesus does things that move in our hearts. November 1, 2020. This is an important date to me. There's an especially important thing that would happen 2 days later. And sometimes it's easy for me to not like those who are more liberal than me politically, or those who are more conservative than me politically. And so on November 1, I opened up my laptop and opened a Zoom meeting, right? And we, about 10 of us, were going to talk about politics 2 days before the election. November 3, this was a big one, right? And we weren't going to talk about the big one. Okay, we had decided early on we're not ready for this. But people from my church, we said, look, as followers of Jesus, we want to talk about what it looks like to love people well. And so in that Zoom call, there were people who were retired with grandchildren. There were people who were just starting out in their careers. There was women, there was men. All sorts of diversity there. And I heard a fellow who had worked in business administration, who had built and ran assisted living homes, right? And one of the things that we were talking about, because we weren't going to talk about the presidential election, it was just too much, right? So we talked about the bills that were on the Washington ballot. That's where my former church was, where I was stationed at that time, where I was serving. And one of those was about a tax on heavy equipment rental. How should companies that hold heavy equipment be taxed? When should those taxes be levied on those organizations? I know all of you are just like, oh, tell me more about this. I want to hear about lease laws in Washington State. Happy Sabbath, right? I won't get into it, but long story short, this fellow who had run assisted living centers, who had built these buildings, he talked about the way that taxes, he talked about the way that these small businesses operate. He talked about the families that are affected by the bill that we would be voting on. And that was enriching for me. And there was a tax on plastic bags. There was a tax being voted. Should you pay 10 cents per bag, in the grocery store? We're familiar with this one, right? And we had people share about the pros and cons and how this affects people, how this affects families, how this could affect the world. And one time in my life, I saw people from both sides coming together around Jesus, around the call of Jesus, because Jesus prays for those who believe in me to be one. To listen to each other, to learn from each other, to figure out how we can be better lovers of people together. Many of us came and went, and we voted the same way we were going to before. We didn't come out, we weren't trying to convert everyone to some specific way. We just wanted to learn how to love better together. This is what Jesus can do. So we here at OC Grace, we accept and embrace diversity, because diversity is the crucible where discipleship happens. On January 9, 2021, Pastor O'Shane Winter returned home to his house in Aurora, Colorado. It's about 25 minutes from the center of Denver. If you're not familiar with the geography, I wasn't, so I had to look it up. But when he came home from church, he found on his garage door graffiti that said, "Bop, expletive, expletive." I won't share it with you this morning. And he realized that for various reasons, his family had to be home that day. And so while someone came and committed a hate crime of vandalism against him and his family, his 2-year-old and 5-month-old and his wife were at the house. And when I heard this story, it touched my heart more deeply than so many of these other stories that I've heard. Now, let me tell you something about my background. I grew up in a city that is now, after years of growing in its diversity, its diversification, now has only 70.5% white non-Hispanic in the city. That's not what we're talking about here, right? When we look at Southern California, 70.5% of the people are white non-Hispanic, right? We have a very small population of people from different ethnic backgrounds in Portland, Oregon. And so for most of my time in school, I grew up surrounded by white kids. A lot of white kids, maybe 1 or 2 black students, a few Latinos, a few we had a pretty good ESL, ELL, English language learning program, so we had a lot of people from Japan, China, Korea, there at Portland Adventist Academy, but so much of my life was surrounded with people who looked just like me. But in 2010, when I was a student at Walla Walla University, we took a trip. One professor took 2 of us students who grew up in this super white Pacific Northwest. He took us to Oakwood University for the Evangelism Council in the fall, in December. Look, up until that point, I had never been a minority in the room, ever. And I was one of 2. 2 white boys coming on this college campus. That's what it felt like anyway. And everybody was looking at us. They weren't unfriendly. They weren't unkind, but I felt their eyes everywhere. We walked into the cafeteria, people were looking, what are they doing here? We walked into the church, what are they doing? We're glad they're here, but what are they doing here? What's going on? That's how it felt to me. And there was one guy, one student there at Oakwood University who, when he saw us, didn't just look. He walked up to us and he said, hey, come sit down at my table. Let's talk together. And his name was O'Shane Winter, theology student at Oakwood University. And he welcomed us in, and I felt brotherhood with this young man, a fellow theology major, right, going on his journey. And then we lost track of each other until Andrews, until seminary, when my first day taking my MDiv was also his first day of his MDiv, and we ran into each other, and it's like, O'Shane? Yeah. And over our time in seminary, we journeyed together, and we talked about life, we talked about culture, we talked about what it is to be black in America, to be white in America. We talked about all these things that for especially the last year have been real points of tension in our country, in our world. And so on January 9, when I hear that my brother, a fellow child of God, a fellow minister of the gospel who has the same value, who's made in the image of the same divine God, has had this hate crime perpetuated against him and his family, has made him feel so unsafe in his own community, it touches me in a way that it never would have before, because diversity, when we're challenged, when we're in spaces that are uncomfortable, diversity, it grows us. Jesus prays for those who will believe in me to be one. And so we here at OC Grace, we accept and embrace diversity. Because this is what Jesus does. This is how Jesus works. Proverbs 27:17, it's a fairly famous proverb. It tells us that iron sharpens iron. Verse 6 in the same chapter of Proverbs tells us that even wounds from a friend can be trusted. Diversity is not easy. In those talks with O'Shane, from time to time, I said things that then months later I looked back on and said, I wish I hadn't said that. I said things that made me feel very foolish and said things that hurt him a little bit, but he was so gracious with me. We journeyed together, we grew, I grew because of a gift that he gave to me, a gift because Jesus brought us together. Diversity is not easy, but it grows us. It grows us in a way that nothing else can. Jesus, he's praying this prayer at a time frequently referred to as the Last Supper. It's this last meal with his disciples before his crucifixion. And now, John doesn't actually share this part of the story, but if you read Luke 22, 24 through 27, a telling of this story from another author's perspective and who captures some of the other details in the story, you see that even at this time, after 3 years journeying with Jesus, the disciples are arguing with each other about who is the greatest. Which one of us is the best? Which one of us is going to get the most honor? Which one of us deserves it more? The disciples demonstrate diversity and the richness and what Jesus wants to do through diversity, perhaps even more than my own life and my own experiences. The examples that I've shared with you demonstrate the richness, the value of diversity. One commentator who I very much appreciate, her name is Ellen White, points this out in Desire of Ages about the disciples. She says that the apostles differed widely in habits and disposition. There were the publican, Levi Matthew, and the fiery zealot, Simon, the uncompromising hater of the authority of Rome, the generous, impulsive Peter, and the mean-spirited Judas. Thomas, who is true-hearted yet timid and fearful, Philip, slow of heart and inclined to doubt, and the ambitious, outspoken sons of Zebedee with the rest of their brethren. These were brought together with their different faults, all with inherited and cultivated tendencies to evil. But in and through Christ, they were to dwell in the family of God, learning to become one in faith, in doctrine, in spirit. They would have their tests, their grievances, their differences of opinion, but while Christ was abiding in the heart, there could be no dissension. His love would lead to love for one another. The lessons of the Master would lead to the harmonizing of all differences, bringing the disciples into unity till they would be one in mind and one in judgment. Christ is the great center, and they would approach one another just in proportion as they approached the center. It is not by avoiding differences to stay comfortable, but actually by working through differences with Jesus as the unifying linchpin that we grow as disciples. Jesus brings these disciples together on purpose to do something amazing in their lives. And I want you to notice again, just apart from this quotation, it coheres in a profound way, I believe, with what we're talking about with diversity. They would have their tests, their grievances, their differences of opinion. But while Christ was abiding in the heart, there could be no dissension. Think about this for a moment. What we're hearing, what is being said here is that even with Christ, people have grievances and differences of opinion. People see things differently, but somehow this is okay because there isn't dissension, animosity, exclusion. When experiences such as this, animosity, exclusion, dissension, when this occurs, we're missing the power and the heart of Jesus, but the presence of differences, of different opinions. That's not the problem. His love would lead to love for one another. The lessons of the Master would lead to the harmonizing of all differences. Harmonizing of differences is the phrase here, not obliterating, expunging, eroding, or removing of all differences. Harmony cannot actually exist if everyone is singing the exact same note. Musicians be like, no, this is how it is. Harmony cannot exist if everyone is right on the exact same note. We need differences. We need diversity. The one who will believe in me through the words of my disciples, Jesus says, each one, not some, not a few, not just a one, the ones who, everybody who will believe in me. Jesus brings people together who are different. So we ask, the ones who are dark, have darker skin, and the ones who are light, who have lighter skin? Yep. The ones with a lot of education and the ones with no education? Yep. The ones who are young and the ones who are experienced? Yep. The ones who are attracted to the people I think they should be attracted to, and the ones who aren't? Yeah, them too. The ones who voted for Donald Trump and the ones who voted for Joe Biden? Yep. What about the ones who didn't vote at all? Even them? Yes, even them too. Who is in? The ones who will believe in me through the words of my disciples. Who believe in Jesus through the words of my disciples, Jesus says. And so we follow this Jesus by accepting and embracing diversity, knowing that even as God uses the motley crew of disciples to grow each of them, and even as God grew me through people who see the world differently than I do, so Jesus shows up in our community through our diversity in ways we would otherwise be blinded to. Diversity is the crucible of discipleship. It's where we find the challenges that grow us to be who God dreams for us to be, to reach and equip disciples, to glorify the loving character of God. The way is through diversity.